What exactly is the difference between a plane ticket and a boarding pass? We all know they're not the same thing, but they're clearly not two separate things either. Arguments and parameters are very much the same way. They're not the same thing, but they're not two completely separate things. Let's look at a few code examples to understand this. Here's some Java, but these same principles apply to C, C++, C#, Python, JavaScript, whatever. So we're defining a method here called print twice. It's a pseudo-polynomial time algorithm for graph isomorphism. No, it prints twice. That's all it does. So in this example, what's the parameter and what's the argument? I'll give you the answer in 3, 2, 1. So this x at the top is going to be the parameter, and this 8 at the bottom is going to be the argument. Now, a more useful and interesting question to ask is, how would you read this code and know that? So you can spot parameters in the declaration of a function or method, and then the parameters get used within the body of that function or method. Parameters are basically variables I use within a method or function to talk about the information that I receive from elsewhere. Arguments, on the other hand, are the specific things that I send in to the function or method when I'm calling that function or method from elsewhere. Elsewhere in this case is just main, so I passed in this 8 as an argument to the method. Then up in the method, the parameter becomes the value of that argument 8, and I'm going to see 2 8s printed out. Here's a quick second example. Again, what are the parameters and what are the arguments? To find parameters, we look at the method or function definition. Here, the parameters are m and n. To find arguments, look at where the method or function is called. Here, the arguments are for and message. Message is a variable, and it gets sent up to the method along with the for, and we see the message printed out 4 times. Now to be more specific, message is a string that contains APCSA, and at the bottom, I'm using that string as an argument, but at the top, that exact same string is now a parameter. But we all know that arguments and parameters are not the same thing. So where do we draw the line? And what exactly is the difference? So we could argue about this. We could also argue about the difference between a plane ticket and a boarding pass, but I'm really not an argumentative person, and we all have better things to do. So let's actually go around that argument by just asking a better question. Instead of asking, what's the difference? Let's ask, what's the connection? So a plane ticket is what we get out our credit card and pay for. When we go to the airport to check in, that plane ticket becomes a boarding pass, which is what we actually use. A parameter is a placeholder. When we actually run the code and call that method or function, it becomes the arguments, which are what is actually used. The parameters essentially become local variables that contain the values you sent in as arguments on that specific call. So these two terms can kind of refer to the same thing at different times and in different contexts. I think that's why people mix these two words up. Now, if you have trouble recalling these distinctions later, just remember, arguments are what happens when you call. Hope that cleared things up for you. My name is John, and I'm a professional computer science tutor. I have a bachelor's and master's in computer science, as well as a teaching certification and over a decade of education experience. I'd love to help you learn to code or raise your score in your college or high school level computer science course. Check my link in the description, and thanks for watching.